you yesterday?
I had another event I couldn't break away. I was trying to, but it ended late. It was on my schedule.
Yeah, fine.
Hafaday, and good afternoon. The Committee on Health, Tourism, Military Affairs, and Senior Citizen now reconvenes this public hearing. The first public hearing was on December 7th, and I'm sorry, December 5th. I'm sorry, I'm getting that. It wasn't in front of me. So that was our first public hearing on Bill 210-34. We're here now today, December 14th, for the second public hearing. As I indicated during our first hearing, the committee at the first hearing had two additional markup hearings which was announced. I want to thank all those who participated in those hearings. Public Health was very active in those hearings that lasted up to 8 p.m. We also had stakeholders who were present and provided a lot of good input, and I see some of them here today, this afternoon. The committee intends to publicly publish a draft substitute version of Bill 210 by tomorrow. And at that time, we will give the public an opportunity to review and digest this draft substitute version, and then we will reconvene another hearing on Monday. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but it's Monday, December 18th at 9 a.m. here at the Guam Congress building. So we just want to ensure that we get the community as much opportunities to provide their input into this proposed rules and regulations, so that once it is adopted and enacted, it's something that has, as much as possible, everyone's input into this into these rules and regulations. So at this time, I would recognize anyone from the public who wishes to provide any additional testimony on Bill 210-34 as introduced. And also we'll give any of our colleagues here any opportunity to ask any questions of those who wish to provide testimony. I'd like to recognize Andrew Roberto. I'm sorry, no testimony. Mr. Roger, I can't read your last name, so if Mr. Roger, is he? Hostifer, yes. If you, please, sir, if you have any testimonies to provide, if you have any testimonies, I invite you to please come up. Ms. Andrea Pellicani and Janine Sablan. Mr. Marcus Cepeda. Mr. August Fest. Yes. Please. Okay, I'll go ahead and recognize you first, sir. Oh, if you don't have any testimony, that's fine.
No, I don't have any testimony. I had questions because I just got a copy of the bill and I haven't had a chance to review it yet.
Sure. And I know it's a little bit too much to ask, but we are going to come back here Monday, December 18th at 9 a.m. Yeah. And at that time, if you do have any questions, I'll recognize you that time as well.
I would like to ask one quick question. Since we're having such a hard time getting a lab, certified lab, are they going to allow the individuals with licenses to grow their own marijuana?
No, the current statute does not allow for home cultivation.
Yeah. See, because Hawaii had the same problem, and for years they couldn't get a lab certified, and so they went ahead and allowed the medical marijuana patients to grow their own. And it only seems reasonable that we should, as an island, should institute the same thing, because they realized they couldn't get, and we even have a smaller population that will be using it also. So it's really hard to justify the money for a lab. I've worked in labs, and I helped Dr. McDougall set up his lab here in Anigua, and it's really hard. It's like you got to have the perfect equipment with the perfect everything to get certified, you know, to get ISO federal certification. And so it's going to take years, and no matter what you say, it's going to take years. And I think that's something that ought to be included in the bill for the benefit of the patients that need it now. because not everyone can afford to fly off somewhere to the States or Hawaii and then they can't bring it back anyway. So it's only beneficial to them while they're there, and then they come back and it's like taking their medicine away when they come back here. So if individuals could grow it on their own as long as they're licensed, and if you know, it needed to be checked by public health or someone, then that would be something you guys would have to look at. But I think if they grow their own, at least they know what they're getting, and it's something that they need. Okay, sorry.
Okay, sir. No, thank you very much for those comments. And the current bill does not include for home cultivation. It's going to require an effort to introduce a bill to include that, or if that's a desire here to include it. But we'll make this process take its course. But your comments are part of the record now. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Marcus? Mr. Cepeda?
Hello, my name is Marcus Cepeda, and I represent Homegrown Guam. I've been here before. Just have a few comments and questions. I participated in the kind of like the review of the current bill, and got a lot of insight of what a lot of the changes and revisions are. However, I still have a few questions regarding the bill. One is, how's Guam community going to articulate medical cannabis once the international patient receives certificate, and where do they go once they do that? And some of the topics that were discussed were perhaps allowing a smoke cafe, recreational parks, private properties such as B&Bs, allowing guests to stay at the B&B and being able to smoke cannabis, designated public smoke areas, and able to medicate it in a vehicle with a private or a business license. Now that is something that I am in a business of tourism. I came here to Guam from California 11 years ago as a food and beverage director, working in the hotel industry, and prior to that in the food and beverage industry for about 20 years. And so I'm familiar with tourism, and that's something that I think, in my opinion, that would benefit the community and the economy here in Guam, allowing patients to partake in these type of services, whether it's the tourism, medical tourism, or staying at a facility where they would allow you to medicate. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but medicate, and also going on different activities, such as perhaps going in a limo and able to smoke in a limo that is a licensed business. Or perhaps even a patient, or if you're renting a car, if you're medicating, if you have to medicate yourself. My concern is that the reason I bring this up is that I would hate for these international travelers to receive a citation for smoking at a beach or in a lobby or in a hotel or an area that they just don't know where they can smoke. So if that's something that could be written, and I know the committee or commission was looking at that and presenting that to the senators. Also, you already have it in public parks. Let's say a beach is a park to me. Considering that you would allow cannabis to be used in a public park. Private property, that's something that the owner or the establishment would set rules for that type of service and allow it and be responsible for that. Just like you allow anybody to smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol in your private establishment. Whether if it's a cafe, I know I mentioned cafe, those are something that we already have regulations in place, like smoking, or you have to be 21 to drink, or you can be 18 to serve alcohol, and so on. So all these regulations are already in place, and they could kind of tie into the cannabis rules. The other question I have and concern would be the database platform and tax revenue accountability. If the government would consider a trigger, a timeline to replace a database system, if that's something that's considered, and using an alternative plan for the registry of the seeds, of the plants. I just think that it's a very costly system, putting in a data system, a registry seed system that for one, you have the cost factor behind it, the implementation, and who's going to be the administrator. That is something that it's kind of like no one really knows. Cost of maintenance and lease of this particular database system, from what I understand, just being at the meeting one day, it was like about $30,000 a month for a lease. And again, I don't have any written documentation from that. I just the person that was talking about it told me that those figures. The government having funds or resources to entertain this type of system, I just don't see it. I mean, from what I know as a small business owner, talking to different departments, we need 50 police officers for public safety, Department of Public Works, they have 3 inspectors or building code inspectors. If one's sick, one's on vacation, you're down to 1, and the list goes on. Also, government funds, resource systems. So that's my concern. It's just where the funds are going to come from. Is it going to be a loan, a grant, private investment? Where is that money going to come from? And when it comes to sales revenue tracking, my experience is using point-of-sale systems. And initially, when this whole program started, that's what I was reading. I thought that's what we were going to do. Just keeping it simple. A point-of-sale system, hotels use it, convention centers use it, restaurants using it. I work for restaurants, establishments. We do $5 million a year, $35 million a year in hotels, convention centers. We use point-of-sale systems. They're very accurate. You have many different sales categories. You can track your revenue, credit card sales, everything you need to know. And you can buy a system for about $1,500. And with this system, you run a sales report, an item, it's called a product mix report. And I'm talking a restaurant system that would apply for this product because, you're selling maybe 10, 15 items, whatever they may be. I mean, you can put 500 items on this system. And what I would recommend is that a POS system would do the job, and you would have a certified public accountant certify your profit and loss statement, your revenue, with what they do, with a balance sheet, with your deposits. I mean, that's how I pay my GRT taxes. My deposits in my checking account, I have $12,000. I pay 4% on taxes, and that's it. I mean, if I get audited, it's very simple. Here's my expenses, my sales report, my deposits. So I think that would keep things easy. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how is the patient going to how is this dispensary going to track the patient with not purchasing cannabis in different facilities, different dispensaries? Well, if let's say public health is the administrator, you issue 2 cards, one for the dispensary and one for the patient, because the bill states that the patient has to have a card on them at all times. So they would still have a card, and the dispensary would have their card. So you can only purchase cannabis at one dispensary, the dispensary of your choice. So that kind of eliminates that issue. And that's something that I wanted to mention because I wasn't discussing in the meeting that I participated in. Again, I'm not an expert at this, but I've been in the business long enough to kind of run a business and kind of put systems in place that's going to get the money to the bank, and the government's going to get their money with sales tax. And I think that is a priority. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I think the lab situation, there hasn't been that's been an issue since day one. I know when I prepare my packet, I always bring this with me, because it took me 2 months and $10,000 to prepare this package, and I'm a professional at it. I run businesses, I open businesses, I do it for a living, and you know, it was very time-consuming. And if we're looking at this particular process to put a package together, and also having a lab and the government with its database system, I just don't see it. I mean, that's only my opinion, you know, from a professional standpoint. And some people in authority, government will say, well, this program is not for everybody. You know, it's not just for the mom and pop operator. And we call mom and pop operators like if you're not a franchise corporate style restaurant. So, okay, well, my question is, sure, it's not for everybody. You got to have money to do this kind of business. However, how is the government going to implement their side of the implementation to provide to let's say adhere to these type of conditions? Having a lab, having a data system, having the personnel, everything that I discussed. So that's my concern. And I know I'm gonna have limited time here, so I'm gonna make this short. California, they never had a lab, medical marijuana, or they never had a registry system for 18 years until they finally legalized recreational. Colorado didn't start with a lab or registry program for seed. And they've been very successful. From what I've been reading, it's over $1 billion this year now in cannabis sales. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Cepeda, for your comments today. We'll continue to take that in, and thank you for your participation at the markup as well. Okay, Janine?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Janine Sablan from Grassroots Guam. We received comments from 3C Comprehensive Cannabis Consulting. I'd like to read that today and then also submit it as a written testimony as well. To whom it may concern, on November 2014, Guam legalized the medical use of cannabis for debilitating conditions. 3 years later, there is still no medical cannabis program in operation. The lead time to implement this program has vastly outlasted an acceptable timeframe. Even when potential alleviations in the process were proposed, such as the allowance of home cultivation to give patients immediate access to their medicine, the governor vetoed these efforts on the basis that these alleviations placed a burden on public health and safety. How ironic it is to prohibit access to a safe and approved medicine on the basis of risks to public health. Indeed, a new program of this nature does require significant oversight and investment to assure its proper implementation. In the context of today's hearing, the implementation of a track and trace system is undeniably needed in a new cannabis program. These systems allow for total transparency for the territory to know how many plants are being produced, that there is no diversion so tax revenue can be logged and accountability for health and public safety can be maintained. However, by implementing these systems, we are also running the risk of kicking the can further down the road by issuing more requirements for tracking, more requirements for testing, and more requirements for training regulators, businesses, and patients on compliance. Since approving the medical use of cannabis, we have waited 3 years already to get to this point. We do not need to wait another year or longer to adapt to the new parameters of the program as they are being outlined today. It is evident that the patients, the stakeholders, and the people at large are willing to work and compromise to implement this program accordingly. But it remains to be showcased that our regulators are on board as well. Too much power over this program has been vested into too few hands. We must utilize our public resources and representatives to their utmost potential. The General Services Agency, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health, the Department of Revenue and Taxation all need to come to the table to institute this track and trace system in an appropriate and timely fashion. Medical cannabis use was approved in Guam to allow its beneficial use to alleviate symptoms of debilitating conditions. Please, we have already had enough diversion from this law as it is, and yet not a single seed has been planted. Implement the program accordingly and allow patients to ease their suffering. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Janine. Andrea?
Hafaday, Senator Esteves, Senator Lee, Senator Terlahi, and Chairman Rodriguez. We are thankful for the opportunity today to put on record our thoughts on the revised version of Bill 10, that we haven't seen the final. We have been a part of the markup process and are aware of some of the topics that are being addressed within the bill. So, Senator Rodriguez, we are aware of your journey from opposition to this program to today, taking your responsibility to be responsive to the people's desire to enact a responsible medical cannabis program, ensuring safe access to patients. I would like to recognize our gratitude for your efforts, despite where your personal feelings may have resided in the past or where they may be today. It takes someone with character to put their responsibility to the people of Guam in front of political ideology or personal feelings. So I want to say thank you on behalf of Grassroots Guam for carrying this torch to address problems we've been facing and for working towards solutions and progress. With that being said, we are in full support of Bill 210, and really it's because of our confidence level. We feel confident that any necessary changes to the program moving forward will be placed in good hands with you, Senator Rodriguez, at the helm legislatively. Again, this program will never be perfect. We will always seek to improve it. We hope that efforts to improve the program will never stop. However, we will not support any efforts to prohibit progress to achieve perfection. Perfection is not an achievable goal. We believe we have a program that is good enough to stand up today with the passing of Bill 210. I wanted to share with you the latest findings from the World Health Organization that was just issued. The Expert Committee on Drug Dependence did an initial review of a cannabis compound. It's called cannabidiol, or CBD, which some of you may be aware of. Recent evidence from animal and human studies show that its use could have some therapeutic value for seizures due to epilepsy and related conditions. Current evidence also shows that cannabidiol is not likely to be abused or create dependence, as for other cannabinoids. The ECDD therefore concluded that current information does not justify scheduling of cannabidiol, and postponed a fuller review of cannabidiol preparations to May 2018, when the committee will undertake a comprehensive review of cannabis and cannabis-related substances. This position flies in the face of what the DEA is pursuing, continuing the path of prohibition based on misplaced political ideologies, outdated science, and reefer madness. We hope this latest news gives you some relief, reaffirming your ongoing support for the people's will. Lastly, I just wanted to reflect on your letter to the Office of the Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney. May I ask whether anyone has considered the health of our government? This is a quote. When a legislator must also perform the role and duty of the carrying out of the laws when those executive chose not to execute. We should not accept that executive functions somehow become optional or based upon a dated moral compass and now is out of sync with the path of our people recalibrated, that our people recalibrated. More importantly, do we not have it in our hearts and by our nature to care that any stalemate on the efficient implementation of this industry hurts no one more than people already going through a world of pain we just can't imagine? This quote, Senator, is a reflection of our position today. We take Director Gillen's threat to resign if given this program as a serious matter that has yet to be resolved. We are not aware of any changes to Bill 10 or discussion about relieving DPHSS of this responsibility. So if the people of Guam are in a position where the director who serves at the pleasure of the governor and sits in a position as public servant refuses to serve the public, where does that leave the people of Guam? We understand your limitations as a policymaker. We are thankful for your efforts, having gone above and beyond your responsibility to address medical and legal roadblocks. But at what point do the people of Guam get to stand up and to say that we are unhappy with the efforts of DPHSS without it being held as a personal affront by the director or his staff? At what point do the people of Guam get to be personally offended that this process of public hearings was called a circus by a director that was appointed to serve this very public? At what point do the people of Guam get to be personally offended that our public testimony was referred to as noise? At what point do we get to be concerned about this program being placed in the hands of a director that has no intention to hear the will of the people, as stated on public record just last week, and who has made very offensive comments to the media over the past 3 years? We are indeed offended by this as well, and very concerned patients who opt for cannabis therapy whose future rests in the hands of the same director. In closing, I want to reiterate our gratitude, our confidence in you, sir, and your team as we lend our full support of Bill 210. But for the record, I ask that a very public threat to the will of the people of Guam be addressed with a very public solution. That's all we have for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your kind words and your testimony, and really for your commitment to this. You've been working very hard over the past 3 years, 3.5 years, to move this forward, and this time with this bill, at least, I've seen it firsthand. So I want to thank you and your group for your dedication to this. I know that this process can be very contentious. It has been contentious. You know, I want to, as I recognize all of you for your efforts, I also do want to recognize Public Health, the team, for for what they've done and to bring it this far. And I know that some of the statements are statements that it's unfortunate. However, I'm hoping that Director Gillen does reconsider his position, because as you've seen from my position, regardless of how I felt about this initially, that position has matured, and knowing the need that our people are expecting from this, and really the will of the people, as you said. So as we are working on the substitute version, as we discussed in the markup, looking at other agencies to perhaps co-operate this program. That's something that we're going to continue to explore, and hopefully be able to include in this markup version. Okay, so thank you very much for your testimony. Did any of the senators have any questions for Ms. Pelacani? Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all of you for providing your testimony this afternoon. But I also want to echo the sentiments of the chair and just thank you both for being such strong community advocates, not just here in the public hearing room, but in multiple different media outlets, and for doing a lot of the homework and for providing us with the data, because we're only as effective as the facts that we know. And so the more that you're able to educate those who are sitting in our positions, the better for our entire community, and educating the community as well. Everybody that's watching these proceedings on TV or pull them up on YouTube. So, and then they can do their own research and get in contact with us. And so the more informed that we all are as a community, I think the better. And so I really want to thank you for taking the time out. I know it's a huge passion for you, and you see a lot of the people in our community who are suffering and who really need help. And so, I want to join the chair in moving these things forward and making sure that we give an opportunity for our people to get the best medicine there is out there. So I just really want to thank you so much for your time and for your efforts.
Thank you, Senator Lee. We appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pelacani. Mr. Fess, we have you. Also, sorry, I didn't do this earlier. Recognize the Vice Speaker for being here, Senator Lee. Senator Esteves, thank you very much for being here today. The committee does intend to recess this hearing at 3:30 today to come back on Monday at 9 a.m. Okay, Mr. Fess?
Good afternoon, Senators, citizens, and citizens. I also have to thank you personally for getting the word out on Conant versus Walters. That's what I testified back in June of last year in my scathing and glaring testimony. I did it that way so maybe people would listen, but nobody listened. And by happenstance of threats of lawsuits was the only way it got to be in public view. and I thank you for stepping up to the plate. Now, some things here in my first part of my testimony might not reflect that, but this is reflective of the past history of the legislature body, their track record. So I want to thank you first before we get into this. This is part due out of frustration, and the second part is what I didn't get to finish in the first hearing. I'll go a couple lines by lines, just outlining what the other senators may have missed, and then I'll continue with that if I could.
Okay. I know we set a time limit, but we've given flexibility. I'll give you the same flexibility as well.
Right. I remember
But,
the first
yes.
hearing you said 5 minutes, and everybody was taking a half hour, so I cut mine at 20.
Yours was 39 minutes. I timed it. So, of course,
Was
I'll give
was
you
it
that. Yes,
long?
it was.
Okay.
39
well,
minutes.
then I'm more than halfway then. I'm more
Okay.
than halfway on that.
Okay,
This
but
is-
just so you know that I am going to recess this by 3:30 today. And so
Well,
if, you know, with
where
your
are we at?
testimony,
What
we want
time
to
we
make
got
sure we
now?
give the senators opportunity to ask you any questions if you have. It's 2:45, so go ahead.
Oh, plenty of time, plenty of time. All right, like I said, thank you first. This is reflective of the past history of the Senate, but you're not the only one or the body is not the only one I address in it. Okay, Bill 21034, a poetic testimony. Our law is in subversion, as Gov. Gillen writs the version. He brings to us 150 pages plus, some faint as it's such a huge perversion. Everyone follows, as our Senate is quite hollow. Calvo and AG dare not beg to disagree after a very long, hard, deep swallow. Void within our law allows a lone wolf overhaul. All were in the dark as he built his Noah's Ark. Our law's rules were meant to streamline, not an excuse to build an ocean steam line. Gov. Gillen has neglected, his past rules were rejected. His ego was affected, his pride, he must protect it. His mind, it seems, impervious. This makes us all quite nervous. Someone please call the CDC, as now we have an infectious disease. This movie we have already viewed, Reefer Madness, with an opposite elude. The patients have lost all patience, it seems. No doctors with courage on this emergency scene. Both raise questions, what exactly is the law? All roads lead back, the department is the flaw. An emergency of the ethics as our government acts heretic, not a matter of semantics, just a result of their dynamics. No commissions impaneled as required to handle complaints and issues we scramble to pay an attorney to ramble. A fatality of legality. Why is this our destined reality? When Gov sets all the rules and fees, it's on Gov for business, a success guaranteed. I can already tell this medicine smells as it's far too expensive for me. That is, if you could get it to market, but the Gov seems committed to just park it, just like a hearse within poetic verse for the Senate to converse. Business has chance to be not only from the very high fees, as growers with small canopies all become over-regulatory. Doctors must write plans to be before any patients now they can see. It's all quite absurd, doesn't anyone see? U.S. mainland's where I want to be. Gov. Gillen on knees as he repeats his pleas. Don't put this on me. If you do, I will flee. I say it to thee in testimony and in the news of all major three. Has he had quite enough, or only a cheap card player's bluff? As all have been kind of tough, but only due to his puffin' stuff. This movie we have already seen, Reefer Madness, with an alternative theme. Some here still like the old version, programmed with a false aversion. The hardest thing on earth to change, 'tis a mind of limited range. Nothing in our law calls for any of these stalls, plans of attack after the fact within the government halls. The patients are protected for the acquisition, not according to Gov. Gillen's biased supposition. Forced to inform doctors where courts and statutes has them protected there, fooling patients not to register as stalemates are a perfected snare. Meantime, many will die before this donkey flies, who's worthy of office to occupy. Home cultivate, we will not wait, as none to produce, patients cooked like a goose. By the way, it's in the law, please read it one, please read it all. Medical use, as where's the weed, acquires thereto a store there's no need. Exemptions stated, with no issues conflated, the patient's conditions with the doctor's permission. We must stay on the ball and bring it on in the Senate Hall. To halt any further unnecessary stalls, it needs to be set and to make the call. What you bring, Mr. Gillen, is most noticeably null. A populace of ignorance or laziness gives an impression of haziness. Senators only give attentiveness when bombarded with your constant busyness. Stay informed, get involved, only path to win this very long haul. We get what we get, don't soon forget, yet just let it happen when you fail to take action, leading to further egregious infractions. Medical only, we would love to kill, as it proves to be a most unswallowable pill. Adult use boast, it's an easier coast down a regulatory hill. Please dust it off, Calbo's cannabis bill, a potential $6 billion for the government till. Pleased to advise and to instill, follow Colorado's very wise will. All right, from what I read last week, like I said, I'll do one maybe sentence to cover to bring you up to speed, and then I'll continue where I left off. The first one, first paragraph or pages kind of addresses the fact that this whole bill, it's outside the law. The director had 4 main areas to come up with rules with. It was the cards, the lab standards, how to do the permits, and how to come up with protocols for destroying unusable cannabis. And that's all supposed to go through the adjudicator process. We could have been much further along with any of this. We don't need 150 pages, you know? And the commission is not established, where also guidelines, you know, the department has a seat at that table. The table hasn't been set. And I guess, you know, there's nobody charged with who actually is in charge of making sure that that commission is impaneled. Then they only meet twice a year anyhow, but anybody brings suggestions to them, they mull it over, then make suggestions to the health committee, and then it goes from there. Potential business investors have already been teased with the much lower fees in the Calvo bill, so that might be a factor. You know, $50,000 for a unusually small square footage for a garden, $5,000 in Calvo's bill. Same $30,000 for a garden 3 times the size in Washington. $1,000 only. Allowable amount, again, sentence does not confine the acquisition to cannabis to a dispensary. If you remember the prior bill, allowable amount, the second part had 2 subparagraphs. The first subparagraph was 2.5 ounces for the patients. Second subparagraph said 2.5 ounces that a dispensary may dispense. Before it got to the floor, got shoved up all in one paragraph, and the second 2 subparagraphs ended up as one sentence. And if you look at that sentence, The patients aren't mentioned in there. The use of the word shall is totally doesn't follow any rules. And as far as the U.S. Supreme Court is concerned, from 1995, when using statutes, shall means may. All right. Going along here, canopy sizes, I had sort of touched on. It kind of needs rewritten because it's saying including all spaces within the boundaries. Then you're paying $50,000, and the way a home, not home, but commercial with tray tables, you got to have a house to get in between. You're paying for all that square footage without any plants. You know, it should be just areas where there are plants. And it says mature plants. Make sure the health department knows what a mature plant is versus an immature plant. Should be only counted as plants that are in the flowering stage, where they're actually growing the bud, the medicine. Applicants should be able to own more than one cultivation site, because it's more important to grow if you have one store but not enough product to grow to give to the patients, then, you know, more consideration and leeway and allowability should be for the growers. The doctors, the first few months, I did Freedom of Information Act to the Department of Health so we could get an idea who's not against it in the medical community, a running tab on practitioners who have been writing certifications. In the subsection for the database, it says the practitioners are confidential, but then you go down further in and it says, except for as provided in HIPAA, which HIPAA gives you a whole list of reasons why you can release information, and one of them being is in the public interest and a public need. We definitely have a public need. How are you going to know? Who's not opposed? You know, you got to go doctor to doctor to doctor, spending thousands of dollars. You know, come up in the hand. Public place, I addressed it, got kind of ignored. A patient in the daytime needs a place to be able to medicate. I suggested that a closed, parked vehicle is private property. That should be, if it's closed and it's parked, not moving, they should, you know, like me, should I have to drive all the way to Mauricio to medicate? It's not realistic. So I see, no matter where it's parked, even if it's in a federal park or the Kmart or whatever, if it's in a closed vehicle, the smoke's not blowing out to anybody, but, you know, your lunch break, your back's killing you, you should be able to medicate. It's not illegal for you to go to a bar and have lunch, a beer with your lunch, not to either one or two to be equated. All right, where am I at? I addressed the fees, I'll address them again. Okay, I'm caught up to where I left off, and then switch to conservation of time, consideration of others. I will not continue line by line on this bill here now, as for me to do so would take a week or more. I will continue in generalities of aspects within the bill and the fundamentals of public law 33-220. I will further strongly stress if anyone within our legislature or the leadership of the executive branch is even remotely serious about having patients gain access to the medicine cannabis through a business framework, we will seek and provide fundamental changes to Public Law 33-220 in areas of fees, canopy sizes, verifiable U.S. mainland patients, in other words, reciprocity. I'm already a California patient. You can't call Department of Health and get a verification here, but you can call my card, my doctor, 24/7 through the internet or on the telephone, 24/7. You can't even do that here. And it's a legitimate doctor, I mean, they've been established for years. They go through a process, a questionnaire process, more so than we have established for our doctors. You know, you give them your history, they ask you questions, even questions about past drug history or substance abuse, alcoholism, whatever. They ask you straight up, and as long as you're honest, you know, they'll give you an honest answer. You've got your certification and a card, and it can be verified. So if we open up the patients to that type of system, they shouldn't have any problems going to the Department of Health with their written certification and their card and saying, here, go ahead, verify it. Then you should be able to get a card for here and on the registry. Not that a card for here is mandatory, it is optional, but to be on the registry, if there was a dispensary here, you still have to be on the registry. Long fees, $12,000 to $52,000 for a cultivation site, for only 2,500 to 10,000 square feet. That's only the biggest one. That's only 100 by 100. $22,000 for a dispensary or manufacturing facility, the kitchen. $10,000 or more in fees and permits and cords, and an additional $20,000 for third-party certifications for the lab testing facilities. I brought up at the meeting at Senator Rodriguez's office, tried to get some straight answer to the Department of Health, because the day of the vote for 33-220, me and Mr. Morrison had a conversation on it. He says, well, the Department of Health has a lab. So I dug into the news articles, and yes, they do have a lab. Yes, they can test plant material for pesticides. And I tried to get out of them. It did me, who certified your lab? Because right now we got to ship somebody in. That's why that's going to cost an additional $20,000. Their lab has never been certified by anybody. No applicant can own more than one cultivation site. A limiting and defeating regularization without canopy size is expanded and fees drastically reduced. No applicant may own more than any one type of business except for a testing laboratory. Oregon cultivators' fees are $1,000 to $5,750 for up to 30,000 square feet. Oregon processors, that's the kitchen, the edibles, $47.50. Their retailers are $47.50. Oregon laboratories are $47.50, all with only a $250 application fee. Our application fees are like $2,000 to $10,000. Applicants may own multiple businesses and multiple business types. Tracking system is provided at no cost by the state. Washington state fees are $1,000 across the board with no limits on business license or types. You can have as many gardens, you can have as many dispensaries. It doesn't matter. $1,000 each. If they can afford to do it for much less and be successful, then so can we. That's the only reason they are successful, is because of the low fees. Subsection 10208, requirements for medical cannabis license, page 67 and 68. Responsible fishes, board members, stakeholders, principal entities, commercial cultivation facilities, all the businesses. At any given time, so long as the application, I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with this. B cites subsection 122510 of public law, F, pages 30 to 33, where it does not explicitly state an entity is limited to only owning one of each types of these businesses, except for the cultivation site. And subsection of both public law and this bill has a need for review and change to allow any entity to own and operate and have interest in more than any one of the types of these businesses, especially multiple cultivation sites. Here is where it is most important that the market demand dictate the needs of the island community or of business, not the government dictate the supply or the demand of having the government influence the prices for the patient. Not that I expect us to have a medical cannabis market anytime soon, or ever for that matter, but the issue needs addressed for when we can have an adult use market. There is no there is not a limit on how many pharmacies one can own or operate, or for that matter, no limit on the production or outlets for alcohol. Subsection 10218, lab testing. I noticed in the new markup they took out testing for pesticides. I thought that was the whole reason we're having a lab. The current high fees, combined with the very expensive certifications, expensive equipment, and the lack of needed businesses established to provide service for, are the biggest obstacles to an investment for a locally, privately owned laboratory. The high business fees and lack of authorized customers and lack of available laboratory testing are also great inhibitions to business investments for cultivation, manufacturing, or dispensing laboratory. This should be considered as an option when we venture into adult use cannabis also. Yeah, $160 at Steep Hill for a test. We're going to spend $1 million for a business that doesn't even exist growing, all for 9 patients. I have already submitted the needed form to the Committee on Health chairperson. There may be a more appropriate form to use in a more permanent permit process, as such activity is covered under the subsections of the DEA website, but my research has been very limited. I did try calling the DEA office, local one, but no one answers the phone. CC 21 CFR Port 1313. There have been news articles of the DEA loosening up on cultivation for research purposes. Therefore, more shipping will be necessary, and the current shipping limit is 100 kilograms per shipment. We only need to ship a few grams of product per test. It is also in the interest of public health and public safety. So that might be a consideration for the Department of Justice. I've gotten a price quote, $160 per test sample from Steep Hills, who have testing facilities in many states and most recently in Hawaii. Filling out some paperwork and $160 test sample test sounds much easier than the recently cited $1 million investments for a local laboratory and for the very limited problematic medical-only cannabis businesses. I highly suggest we diligently explore this possibility of the option until successively or thoroughly exhausted. At least the director and I agree on something, this and adult use cannabis. He submitted, it was back in November last year, he dropped off the CNMI bill to Phil at K57. He came on the radio promoting it, saying, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do. Now you see, that's been his motive all the time. Doesn't want it this. He'll even go with adult use rather than be strapped with this over-regulated medical system. And that's what I say. If you want to get the medicine in the hands of the patients, we need to scrap this, go with adult use. That way you don't have to go play hide and seek with the doctor, then you got to dance with the doctor, then you got to go through all the regulatory process. Now they're adding a regulatory process for the doctors who are already hiding in the closet anyhow. Okay, subsection 10223, as previously stated within Public Law 33-220, subsection 122512, operation standards, and see, that's the whole thing. Operation, it states the licensed medical cannabis business shall develop standard operating procedures, protocols, and trainings for the safe handling and dispensing of medical cannabis to include 1, storage protocols, 2, reasonable security protocols, 3, inventory control, and 4, distribution system. Like I said, this whole bill's gone way outside the ballpark of what Department of Health was mandated. The law says 4 areas they were to come up with things for. They could have done this a long time ago and going through the regular process. The required security and associated costs should be no more than is required for a regular pharmacy. The requirement to shield plants from aerial view is also abundantly unnecessary and unduly burdensome for a business. Subsection 10224, tracking, seed to sale. Is it affordable? Multiple millions? Is it workable? With a department that can't even provide cards for 8 patients after 3 years and be given $300,000? Is it needed just to stall any business from operating? How many states actually use it or require it, and at what cost? Some have tried various methods, some are dropping it. Recent article cites cost of $10 million for Pennsylvania, $6 million for Ohio, $3 million for Washington, and in 2015 is $1.7 million for Oregon, and they're currently revamping their systems with an unknown cost. Which software, if any, is suggested or provided or specified in the new bill? None. In Oregon, the software is provided by the state at no cost to the business. But of course, they have adult use cannabis. Food for thought. Again, in Public Law 33-220, subsection 122512, Operation Standards Licensed Medical Cannabis Business shall develop, okay, I think no. Procedures for protocols for storage protocols, reasonable security protocols, inventory control, and distribution systems. Some here think everything will magically work out within the business community without the fundamental changes being addressed here. As long as a business owner can hemorrhage money long enough for doctors and patients to multiply, for the testing laboratory to appear, and for everything to just work itself out, even the end price of the product at the counter for the patients. I will believe that when I start to see unicorns appearing from rainbows. Who is going to lay down their money first to speculate on someone to follow suit, all to provide product and testing for 9 registered patients? What is the number of registered patients needed to sustain all the fees and costs of the needed facilities to produce, test, and dispense medical cannabis? Or you could look at how long is it going to take to produce that many patients? Adult use is the only answer and solution. When the Gov sets all the rules and fees, it's on Gov for business and success guaranteed. At some point, someone has to start using common sense. Lastly, and again, doing the same things the same way with the same people, you will get the same results. Medical only I would love to kill, as it proves to be a most unswallowable pill. Adult use boasts it's an easier coast down regulatory hill. Cannabis has been here much longer than any of us, and it will be here long after any of us have been long gone. Why must we make things so complicated? It's a plant. Get over it already. Guam, wake up. If Guam funds my total deportation with belongings to the U.S. mainland, where quality cannabis is affordable and abundant, I will agree to no longer testify at public hearings, quit making comments in the local paper sections, and stop emailing and visiting the legislative members and executive branch members, along with the news outlets and radio. I am certain the director will contribute. All right, did I make the time frame? All right, got in under, didn't get the hook. Shoot him from the balcony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fest. Is there anyone else who wishes to present oral testimony today? We'll just wait a few minutes for the chair to step out for 1 minute. Were there any questions from the panel? Senator
No
Stevis?
questions.
Senator Lee? I didn't know you had those poetry talents. Very good. Yes, it was very interesting and very interesting. There he is.
Ms. Pelicani, if you got a moment, we have about 15 minutes left for the hearing. I'd like to not have some comments, and I'd like your thoughts on them, only so that we can enter them into the record as part of the process to looking towards a potential of a substituted version of the bill. I just wanted to get your thoughts regarding patient or registry. And one of the things we're looking at, well, I think it's been discussed during and some of the hearings, was a quantity limit on purchase. And so I've been thinking about that thought, and there's actually a lot of models that work. So currently in the States, for something simple that was an over-the-counter medication, not particularly seen as harmful, or not seen as harmful in its state, but just how it's used illegally. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the over-the-counter drug pseudoephedrine. So it's an over-the-counter drug for a long period of time, but when certain bad elements started using it to produce methamphetamines, they had to put restrictions on the quantity for purchase. So even though it's a very viable medication, there are limitations on it. So you can potentially purchase about 20 pills per month. So there are tracking systems that exist. Would your group have any opposition of a similar type of tracking system, but the requirement would actually have to come with a central database?
Right. We were never opposed to the tracking of sales. We've never been opposed to imposing a time frame limit. What we were opposed to was patients having to sign a document waiving their Fifth Amendment right to sign up for a registry card. As you can see, we just had a constituent last hearing requesting for the databases to be matched up with the gun database, the firearms ID database, so that medical cannabis patients can be asked to surrender or forced to surrender their guns. Those are the types of things that we're trying to have foresight to protect as far as patients go. And so this was what we have put on record since 2 years ago. This gun debate has just been happening in the past year. Those are the things that we were trying to protect. It's not the tracking of how much they're purchasing. We're not opposed to any efforts to minimize diversion. We've been looking also into different tracking programs. Metric is I think, the most widely used one. They've been in the market for the most period of time, I think, and they've been able to work. I guess if there was a sort of industry standard, Metric would be that. We know that MJ Freeway has been hacked. They've lost data, putting their businesses in situations where they would fall out of compliance because their data got wiped out. And as a requirement by law, you need to be storing X amount of data for X amount of years. And so when you rely on a cloud-based system like that, and then your data gets wiped out, again, we're talking anything that we do to fall out of compliance could come with a federal penalty. So extra caution, I think, is what we're looking at.
There are a couple things I'd like to add. I think there are some models where certain information, obviously, I wouldn't say obviously, but there's a lot of information that's protected, and I see, and I thank you for your advocacy to preserve patient privacy. Somebody engaging, at least I believe this truly, that somebody engaging in a legal program with regards to medical cannabis shouldn't be automatically pegged as a criminal, and it should not be used against them. So I understand that. I am looking at applying amendments, and that's why I want to state this on the record at the hearing, at adding additional layers of protection, so that information regarding the patients that public health might have should not just be a free-for-all for anyone to use for their own purposes. And there are models like this that work with regards to regulations on information sharing, and you see this a lot of times with even federal agencies, where one agency has to subpoena another agency just to get information. So those additional layers of protection, I think, are going to be needed within this legislation if we were to look at a central database. Only because with the model of limitation, it's not necessarily to say if somebody goes out and they purchase 2.5 ounces, before their 14-day mark, they go out and purchase another 2.5 ounces, doesn't necessarily mean that they're out there trying to collect as much as they can. It could be an honest mistake. But there should be a system that communicates with the dispensaries as well as the central repository that would just red flag the individual and prevent them from purchasing outside of the authorized limit.
Right. I mean, it could be something as simple like I have a designated caregiver, and I say, hey, I'm running out of medicine. Can you go pick something up for me? And then let's say somebody says, hey, they have this kind of medication over at this other dispensary. You should go check it out. And so me as a patient, I'll go and check it out only to find out that my caregiver did pick up my medicine a couple days. It could be something that simple. It's not necessarily nefarious, you know. And so, again, we're not opposed to tracking the limit. We were just opposed to forcing a patient to sign a document waiving their Fifth Amendment right.
And I support that. I mean, I do not support that idea that there should be any type of signing of a document that kind of alleviates them of some of their fundamental rights. Do you have any opposition to name-based tracking, inclusive of, okay, any issue with date of birth and home address? Kind of like a three criteria.
Identity markers are not necessarily a problem. Our only issue, and Senator Rodriguez is aware, is the implementation of the program and how a seed-to-sale tracking system could further delay the program. That was pretty much the only issue that we had on the table today. We've already waited 3 years, and the program can stand up as it is, with the enforcement being on the patient, right? Like if they have to sign a waiver saying, I understand that my limit is 2.5 ounces every 14 days, whatever it may be. I mean, I just don't want patients to have to wait anymore. We have a program. There's nothing that should be holding this program back anymore. Nothing.
And what I'm trying to get a good grasp of, I know there are some estimates out there, but based at least on what we see currently in terms of the local population, and we could even do an additional study inclusive, or look into inclusive of what the potential increased amount would be based on the medical tourism market. I think we really need to answer the question of how much cannabis do we expect in terms of poundage to be on the island?
We did an initial, it wasn't even worth, I don't even want to call it a study, because that's not what we did, but we estimated if 1% of cancer patients just from Japan came in, it could be an additional 6,000 to 8,000 pounds. That's 1% of cancer patients from Japan, one. And it could amount to somewhere around $10 million.
And that might be something just to really look at, right? When we invest, and as we're looking at investing, and oftentimes in Gov Guam, they look for a system or a program that has all the bells and whistles. And I think what we really need to establish, and my belief is we don't get too caught up on what that system is, but really figure out what it does. I mean, if we're looking at 6,000 pounds, 10,000 pounds total seed to sell tracking, something that small of a quantity should not be overly difficult to track, if it is just tracking by weight. You track, as I understand it, and looking at different state models, if they're not using a GPS system, they're tracking the plant, they're tracking the quantities. When that plant is cultivated, there's a ledger. When that plant is cultivated, they weigh it, the amount of pounds produced, how many seeds are taking, it's all weighed. If they're extracting and manufacturing and extracting oil, that oil has a weight. And then all of that should match up in an audit with what the plant started with by poundage. And then even as they're moving through the laboratory. And then at the dispensary, at the end of the day is, and this is really putting it very, maybe, hopefully not too simply, if you have 100 pounds pulled from plants at a grow operation, as it goes through the processes and tested, you have 100 pounds at the dispensary ready for sale. And then 100 pounds, if they're sold, should be sold at the dispensary. So as long as all the numbers match up, it should be fairly simple. And any inconsistency with the ledger, I think is where the enforcers and regulatory agencies can really look into that.
Right. There, it even goes so far as to measure how much trim you're tossing. So if you harvest X amount, you weigh it as a whole harvest, a gross weight, and then you subtract the trim that you're pulling from it.
That they're going to
and
make
then
oil
the water
from.
weight
I
when
see.
you cure and dry. I mean, there's a whole tracking system for that already in place.
And is it your belief that the businesses or potential businesses and the industry itself will almost self-regulate in many ways, or have the potential without a very robust tracking system? Do you believe that the industry will take caution to ensure that they're in compliance?
Anybody that falls out of compliance, and this is one thing I brought to the markup, once you fall out of compliance, and we do have a budget amendment in place right now that does protect our program. It protects patients and protects businesses. We don't know what's going to happen to it after the 22nd. I feel that they'll renew it. I hope they renew it. But once you fall out of compliance, you then subject yourself to DEA and the Department of Justice, which could mean 20 to 40 years in prison for any business owner. And so if you want to talk about what's the best check and balance, I would say anybody who's opening a cannabis business facing 20 to 40 in federal prison for falling out of compliance with GovGuam is probably heavier than falling out of compliance with GovGuam. And so moving forward, we do intend to, not just as we advocate for patients, but advocate for the entire industry, including the businesses, to know what are your penalties, what happens if you don't do your accounting properly, what are the type of things you can deduct, what are the type of things you can't deduct. We do want to move this program, but until people start filing for licenses and we start getting this program, we don't have an industry. These are the things that need to be done, but as we sit and wait for the program, they can't be done. Nobody still comes forward until they start filing. Till we have a legitimate industry, then we can come together as an industry to police ourselves. That is the most important thing that this industry can do. Will it have bad, sin actors or whatever you want to call them? It's quite possible. But we have a small enough community where I think we could be able to come together as an industry to make sure that nobody is looking at 20 to 40 years in federal prison just because they didn't weigh their trim properly. That's not the kind of thing that anybody wants to, or they forgot to put this in their ledger, or they tried to deduct the purchase of equipment when they really wasn't, it's a really big deal.
And those are the things that I just wanted to, again, readdress for the record, is really the quantity and number of businesses that we're looking out there for, and whether there are other options at least available now to get the program moving outside of a very robust tracking system. And so whether it's a hybrid or something in the interim that could work as we move forward, I just want to bring that to the table as other options regards to statutory requirements. So as I'm reading the bill, I think how and what we want to track is important, what we want to track is important, but I think the how should have more options available to the government as a whole, with more players involved to figure out how we meet and execute, or how they meet and execute the intention of the law. And so, and I just want to bring that up again for the record as we look, so that everything is documented, so whatever amendments may come, whether on session floor or within the substituted version, has been publicly heard, and with an opportunity for people to address their issues or their thoughts with that. So,
if I could just make one more comment. Again, the whole goal of regulating cannabis as a legitimate industry, the goal is to get it off the street.
Yep.
Because that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're talking about. And so if you over-regulate, there's a very delicate balance of creating a robust industry that people are going to say, I don't want what's on the street. You got to put the businesses that are going to participate by applying for licenses and complying with public health and complying with public works and paying all these fees. You've got to be able to put them as a government in a position to compete with what's being illicitly done. Give them
And
the
I
tools
agree.
and get it off the street.
And just speaking for myself, and we're about to wrap this hearing up, there are three things that I would be looking for with the tracking system. One, that the quantity balances out and zeroes out with what is grown and what is sold, regardless of whatever form it comes out of. Number two is that if we look at a purchase limit of 2.5 for every 14 days or 30 days or whatever we decide, that patients are not able to purchase over that amount. And then the other aspect is just ensure that the testing, that the product is safe. So when I look at this legislation, with regards to requirements, those would be for me, and any potential amendments, just the very simple things that we want to know. Is there any leakage or spillage of product or raw material? Is the product safe for the consumer? And are people purchasing within the allowable quantities? So again, I don't think there's, at least for myself, and I can speak for Senator Rodriguez, or not speak for him, but I believe there's nobody out there looking to overly regulate and stifle the industry, ultimately leading to a lack of access for the patients that actually need it. So thank you for addressing my questions. I just wanted to see what your thoughts are and apply. We've had conversations in the past, but I want to ensure that it was on the public record so that any potential amendments or policy changes that come from it can be discussed appropriately. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator, and to Andrea, and to all the other two senators who are here. The committee will recess this hearing until Monday at 9 a.m. here at this Guam Congress building. We do intend to publish a draft substitute version sometime tomorrow. We'll make sure that we get everyone who's been involved in this process a copy of that, and also to the general public through a media release. Okay, thank you very much. So we are in recess till Monday at 9 a.m.